Technical difficulties here. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Deliver us from evil. Jesus' ministry was among imperfect people. And he encountered evil in many different forms. And some of it was external. And the external things that he experienced was, in Mark 5, we have found that he had an encounter with a stranger. Jesus and the disciples arrive on the shore, and they're greeted by a man who's been living in the tombs. He's been terrifying the village that he lives near. He's been so strong that when they tried to chain him, he would break the chains and be able to do what he wanted to do. He terrified everybody in the village. And when Jesus encountered him, he didn't know who he was, but he asked him, "What is your name?" And the gentleman said, "My name is Legion, because that's how many demons are in me." And Jesus said, "In the name of God, I pronounce these demons to leave you, cast them out of him." Now we happen to know it was a Gentile part of town, or Galilee, because there were a herd of pigs. Jews don't eat pigs. They don't raise pigs. So Jesus casts the demons out of the man into the pigs, and the pigs all go berserk and drown themselves in the Sea of Galilee. And the man was so grateful. But to realize he had been living in tombs, he'd been living in caves, he'd been terrorizing people, he was experiencing evil. Jesus experienced and freed him from that evil. But Jesus also experienced evil from friends. And in John chapter 13, we have the story of Jesus being at the Last Supper. And he says, "Guys, one of you is going to betray me." And Peter says, "Is it me? Is it me? Is it me?" The one who doesn't say it is the one who's going to do it. Who is it? Judas. Judas, who was the money keeper for the disciples. He was the treasurer of the disciples. And it's Judas at the table who Jesus says, "Whoever I sup with right now is the one," and hands Judas a piece of bread. And the text tells us that Satan entered him. And Judas got up at that moment and went to meet with the Pharisees because he had turned Jesus in for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a common slave in first century Israel. So Jesus encountered evil in a stranger. He encountered evil in a friend. But that's not the only place we can find evil. We all know that Mark is the best gospel. You know that, right? And it's not just because it's my name, but Matthew uses Mark as an outline. Luke uses Mark as an outline. So Mark is the one who had impact on all three of those Gospels. Because both Matthew and Luke were busy copying different things and stories from Jesus' life. In chapter 7, Jesus says, let's read it together. "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come." Jesus was letting his disciples know that evil can be from external purposes, sources, but it also can be internal. And Mark does a nice job of offering 6. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but 6 evils that he lists come next in the text. And the forms that evil take, we're going to look at each of them very briefly. The first one is greed. And Zacchaeus is the perfect example. Jesus encounters a man who's been a tax collector for the Romans. And Zacchaeus has gotten ridiculously rich by charging. The way that tax collecting worked in the first century, the tax collector would be working for the Romans, but also for himself. So he could charge whatever he wanted. If the tax per person was going to be $10, for example, he could charge 20, 30, 40, give the $10 to the Romans, and keep the rest for himself. And so Zacchaeus had made a fortune by taxing his fellow Israelites unfairly. He's a picture of greed. And Zacchaeus, when he has the experience of encountering Jesus, Jesus says to him, I'm going to go to your house for lunch. You have nice clothes. I bet you're going to give me a good lunch. But while they're at lunch together, Zacchaeus is transformed. And he quits being the tax collector that's out for himself, but he becomes generous and be willing to share. A second form evil can take, according to Mark's list, is malice, which is the intention to do harm. And malice is something that the disciples experienced when they were with Jesus. And Jesus has just gone through the temple, turning over tables and making a big ruckus because he was watching how the temple had become a place that was ripping people off, not meeting spiritual needs. And in that moment, the Pharisees got together and said, you know what? This guy has to die. Their intention was to see that Jesus was executed. And why did they want to do that? Because he was disrupting their world. They didn't like what was going on. Jesus was only helping people, healing people, doing nice things for people, and that was not satisfactory to the Pharisees because he wasn't doing it their way. And so malice was the intention to do evil to Jesus. A third example of evil in Mark's gospel is deceit. And the story that we're all familiar with is Jesus is being tempted. He's on top of the temple. He's looking over. I kind of picture the Jesus that's on this roof. He's up there, and Satan says to him, you know what? There's a shortcut for you getting power. All you have to do, Jesus, is bow down, worship me, and I will give you the whole Las Vegas Valley. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. Now, Satan didn't really have that to give. He was lying. And he was also trying to be deceitful, trying to get Jesus to worship him. And Jesus said, no, I will not worship you. I will not take the shortcut. I'm going to do it the way God intended it to happen, even though it meant great pain and suffering for Jesus. There are 3 more forms of evil that Mark lists. One is envy. And the story that comes with that is a beautiful one of the older brother in the story that Jesus told about the prodigal son. 2 brothers. The older brother stays home, does what he's supposed to do. He's going to inherit the same amount no matter what. But he's envious of his younger brother who leaves the farm, leaves the household, takes his portion, which has nothing to do with the older brother's portion. Nothing. The older brother's going to get what he gets, but the older brother wants what the younger brother has. And the envy that he has creates friction in the family. It's a challenge, it's difficult. And the father says to both boys, "You are welcome in my house. I love you both." And the older brother says, "But he got..." And Jesus said, "You're going to get what you deserve, period." You're not being threatened. Yet he was envious of his younger brother. Fifth one is slander, making false statements about somebody else. And we all remember when Jesus is arrested, he's brought before Herod, and the Pharisees make up all kinds of lies to say he has done this and he's done that. And they take him to Pilate and they lie some more because they want to get rid of Jesus. Remember, they had malice in their hearts weeks and months before. And now they have a chance through slander to lie, to say things about Jesus that were not true. And when Jesus could have been defensive, he could have said, "Hey, what are you talking about?" He stays quiet. He lets them do what their intent is to do. Evil can come in the form of trying to make false statements. And the last one that Mark mentions in chapter 6 is arrogance. And arrogance is something that Jesus never used. Arrogance is something that we can all feel at times, isn't it? We can all judge somebody else that we're better than they are, that we are able to do what they can't do. And it's such an easy temptation to be arrogant about what we can do and someone can't do. Arrogance is an evil that puts people in classes that they don't need to be in. Jesus said, "I have a concern for all people." And what Jesus does is give them a chance to understand that. Jesus is a perfect example of non-arrogance. Peter's the one that said, "Lord, I'll be with you to the end." "Sure you will, Peter." "You bet I will. They won't get past me." And Jesus looks at him and says, "3 times you're going to deny me before the sun rises tomorrow morning." "I'll be there, Jesus." Cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo. His arrogance got in the way. Peter was not able to maintain what he thought he could do in his own strength. What does all this have to do with Good Samaritan Lutheran at the Lakes? How do you like our new name? But here's one that I think is a great Romans. Paul said it this way. Let's read it together. "Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its evil desires." Don't ever think we can't be evil ourselves, is Paul's message. We want to resist it, to use the power of Christ. If we want to rebel against it, use the power of Christ. But we all have the potential, the capability in our mortal bodies to fulfill our evil. We all have our moments of greed or malice or deceit, envy, slander, arrogance. We're all capable probably all done some of these, if not all. I know I have. Don't let the sin reign in your hearts. The second verse that Paul or Peter gives us, let's read this one together. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with a blessing. Jesus is hanging on the cross, having been beaten, tortured, nailed, in his dying breaths. Does he call down angels to get even? Does he curse them? No. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus was able to maintain a sense of humility. And Peter captures it in this verse. Don't repay evil with evil, insult with insult. Instead, repay evil with blessing. And in so doing, we too have a chance to be delivered from evil. Thanks be to God. Amen.